I'm so thankful for the time that I had with the girls and how the three feelings allowed us to connect when the world slowed down. And it really gave me an inside look into their day. I believe doing this with them allowed them to come into the world with open hearts and kindness.
It is a Friday evening in late May, the kind of evening that feels ordinary in every possible way. The sun is still high over the Columbia River as it cuts through the valley, and the town of Wenatchee, Washington moves at its usual quiet pace. Families are wrapping up their weeks, kids are heading into the weekend. And somewhere on a residential street in this small Pacific Northwest city, three little girls are climbing into a white pickup truck. Paityn Decker is 9 years old. Her sister Evelyn is 8. And the youngest, Olivia, has just turned 5. They are excited. They are laughing. They are going to spend the evening with their father. It is a court-ordered visitation. Routine, scheduled, unremarkable on paper. He is supposed to have them for a few hours and return them by 8 o'clock that night. Their mother, Whitney Decker, watches them go. 8 o'clock comes, no knock at the door, no headlights in the driveway, no sound of little feet running back inside. Whitney waits. She calls. No answer. She calls again. His phone rings out into silence. Minutes stretch into an hour. The unease that starts as a quiet worry becomes something sharper, something cold. By 9:30 that night, she is on the phone with police. What follows is a call that local authorities would initially treat as a civil matter, a custody dispute. No Amber Alert is issued. Not that night. Not the next morning. Investigators would later classify the case as an endangered missing person situation, a distinction that would draw enormous public criticism in the weeks ahead. Parents across the country would question how 3 missing children didn't trigger the most well-known child safety protocol in America. But on that Friday night, the machinery of a formal search had only just begun to turn. May 31st passes. The 3 girls do not come home. They miss a 5,000 run they had been looking forward to. Their absence is felt by everyone who knew them. By the 1st of June, their faces are on news broadcasts across Washington state. Then, on the afternoon of June 2nd, a white 2017 GMC Sierra pickup is located near Rock Island Campground along Icicle Creek in Chelan County. The campground sits in a stretch of rugged wilderness outside the small mountain town of Leavenworth, roughly 40 miles from Wenatchee. The terrain is remote. Thick with pine, carved through by Cold Creek water, deputies approach the abandoned truck. The wallet of Travis Caleb Decker is inside. On the tailgate, there are bloody handprints. Near the campsite, investigators push deeper into the trees. What they find there stops everything. The bodies of Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia Decker are discovered together near the campsite. They are bound, they are dead. And the man who drove them to that place, their father, is gone. The search for Travis Decker becomes the largest manhunt in the history of Chelan County. And the question that will haunt the weeks and months that follow is one that no one yet has an answer to. How did it come to this? Welcome to Blood Betrayal Files, the channel that goes where the story goes, no matter how dark the road. In today's case, we are covering the Travis Decker familicide, a tragedy that shook the Pacific Northwest and reignited national conversations about veteran mental health, child safety, and the warning signs that can go unseen until it is far too late. If you are new here, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a case. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We have a community here from every corner of the globe, and we love hearing from you. Now let us get into it. To understand what happened at that campground along Icicle Creek, investigators had to go back through the years. Back through a life that had slowly, quietly come apart at the seams. Travis Caleb Decker was born on August 15, 1992, in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. He grew up in the Midwest before making his way to the Pacific Northwest, where he would build the life he had imagined for himself: a family, a career, a home in the mountains. He enlisted in the United States Army in 2013. The following year, he was deployed to Afghanistan. It was the kind of service that changes a person in ways that are hard to articulate and harder still to live with. After returning from active duty, he transitioned into the Washington National Guard, continuing to serve while attempting to build a civilian life alongside his growing family. To those who knew him before the military, and even to many who knew him after, Travis Decker appeared to be a dedicated father. People described him as outdoorsy, adventurous, the kind of man who genuinely loved taking his children into the wilderness. He hiked with them, he camped with them. The mountains that would eventually become a backdrop for something unimaginable were, for a long time, simply the places he loved most in the world. But the transition out of military life had not been clean. Like tens of thousands of veterans before him, Decker came home carrying things that had no easy name and no easy treatment. He was believed to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a condition that, in its more severe forms, can shatter sleep, fracture relationships, and create a psychological landscape that is nearly impossible for those on the outside to fully understand. Those close to him described him waking in the night, disoriented and distressed. He struggled with stability in ways that compounded over time. His marriage to Whitney Decker lasted a decade before it finally gave way. The couple divorced around 2022 and 2023, and Whitney was awarded full custody of the 3 girls. Travis was given structured visitation, 3 hours on Fridays and 8 hours every other weekend. It was limited contact, built around the instability that had come to define his daily life. By the time the girls disappeared, Decker was effectively homeless. He cycled between his pickup truck, temporary motels, and campgrounds, the same kinds of remote, wooded sites where he had once taken his daughters for weekend adventures. He had struggled to maintain consistent employment. Financial pressure was constant. His support network had thinned, and yet, to many people in his orbit, he remained someone who appeared to love his children. There was no documented history of violence toward Whitney or the girls, no restraining orders in place, no prior incidents involving the children. In September 2024, 8 months before the murders, Whitney Decker had filed a petition to revoke her ex-husband's overnight visitation rights. Her concerns centered on his mental health and living situation. The court denied the request. Travis Decker retained his visitation schedule. That denial would become one of the many painful moments that people revisited in the aftermath, searching for the point where something could have been different. In the days following the discovery at Rock Island Campground, investigators began pulling back the curtain on the weeks that had preceded the murders. What they found painted a picture of a man who was not simply struggling, but was moving, in some deliberate and disturbing way, toward a final act. The first significant detail came from digital forensics. A search of Decker's devices and online activity revealed that in the days before the custody exchange on May 30th, he had been looking up how to move to Canada, how to relocate, what jobs were available across the border. Investigators who reviewed this information later suggested it pointed to someone who had been considering disappearance, not just as a vague thought, but as something he was actively researching. There is a pattern that professionals who study familicide cases have documented across many different cases, and it almost always involves a person who has convinced themselves that they are trapped, that there is no future available to them. And in the most extreme and devastating iterations, this thinking extends to the people they love most, the belief, warped beyond all reason, that those people cannot or should not be left behind. Whether that logic drove Travis Decker's actions is something investigators could never fully confirm. He left no suicide note. He made no recorded statements in the final days, but the digital trail told its own story. There was also a minor but revealing incident on May 27th, just 3 days before the murders. A dashcam captured Decker involved in a fender bender at a Wenatchee Safeway parking lot. The footage showed him visibly frustrated, agitated. He received a ticket for driving without insurance. It was a small thing, the kind of petty setback that most people absorb and move past. But in the context of everything else, it seemed to represent the brittleness of the mental state he was carrying. On the afternoon of May 30th, Decker arrived at Whitney's home to pick up the girls for his scheduled visitation. He and Whitney spoke briefly for somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes before the girls got into the truck. Whitney later recalled nothing unusual about the exchange. He seemed to her like himself. The girls were happy. They climbed into his white GMC Sierra without hesitation. By all outward appearances, it was a completely ordinary handoff, but investigators would later come to believe that what happened next was not impulsive. The route to Rock Island Campground, the supplies that were found at the scene, the remoteness of the location, the manner in which the three girls were killed. All of it suggested something that had been, in some terrible way, planned. Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia did not know. How could they? To them, it was just time with their dad, a drive into the mountains they had taken before. The trees they recognized, the creek they had probably played beside. They trusted him completely. That trust is one of the most devastating elements of this case, and one of the hardest to sit with. Rock Island Campground sits in a corridor of wilderness that most people would describe as beautiful. It rests along Icicle Creek in Chelan County, flanked by pine forests and mountain ridgelines. On any other weekend, it is the kind of place where families pitch tents and kids fall asleep to the sound of moving water. On June 2nd, 2025, it became a crime scene. When deputies located Decker's white 2017 GMC Sierra near the campground, the scene around it told a story without any words. His wallet was inside the truck. That detail alone spoke volumes. A man who intended to return would take his wallet with him. A man who did not intend to return would leave it behind. On the tailgate, there were bloody handprints. Initial speculation centered on whether the blood belonged to Decker himself, which would have been an early indicator of his fate. But forensic testing would later confirm those prints came from his dog, who had been recovered alive near the scene. The animal had sustained some kind of injury and had left its mark on the truck's exterior. Deeper into the surrounding area, investigators found the bodies of the three girls. The autopsies conducted in the days that followed confirmed what the physical evidence at the scene had already suggested. Each of the three children had been restrained. Their wrists were bound with zip ties. Plastic bags had been placed over their heads, 2 bags on 2 of the girls, 3 on the youngest. The official cause of death was asphyxiation. The manner of death was ruled homicide. Forensic technicians processed every surface, every item in and around the campsite. The zip ties and plastic bags were sent to the crime lab. DNA analysis, conducted weeks later, results announced in early August, conclusively linked Travis Decker to those items. His genetic material was on the bags and the restraints. The victim's DNA was also present on the bags. No other DNA profiles were recovered. There was no one else involved. What the physical evidence could not answer, and what no amount of forensic science would ever fully resolve, was the sequence of moments inside that campsite. The conversation, if there was one. The point at which the girls understood something was wrong, if they ever did. These are the details that exist only in the minds of the people who were there, and those people are gone. What investigators were able to establish is that the killings almost certainly took place sometime between the evening of May 30th and the time the bodies were discovered on June 2nd. After that, Travis Decker walked away from the campground and into the surrounding wilderness. He left behind his wallet, his dog, and his daughters. He took with him whatever it is a person carries after committing an act like that, and whatever plan, or lack of one, existed for what came next. The crime scene was processed with extraordinary care. A full forensic grid search of the surrounding area was launched weeks later in late August, involving close to 100 personnel. Every square meter of accessible terrain was examined. Bones were found in early September, but testing confirmed they were non-human. Decker's trail, at that point, had gone cold. What followed the discovery at Rock Island Campground became the largest and most resource-intensive manhunt in the recorded history of Chelan County. From the moment it was confirmed that Travis Decker was missing and his daughters were dead, law enforcement issued an unambiguous warning to the public. He should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. His years of military training were central to how investigators and search teams approached the hunt. He had served in the infantry. He had been deployed overseas. He had attempted to pass the grueling Ranger School, a course that trains soldiers in small unit tactics, land navigation, and wilderness survival under extreme conditions. Though he had not completed Ranger qualification, the training he had absorbed made him a fundamentally different kind of search subject than a typical fugitive. He understood the terrain. He knew how to move through forest without leaving an obvious trail. He had camped in that region before, and the wilderness surrounding Leavenworth, the Cascades to the west, the Okanogan Highlands to the north, the Wenatchee National Forest stretching in every direction, is not a landscape that gives up its secrets easily. The search operation was extraordinary in its scope. The Chelan County Sheriff's Office coordinated alongside the FBI, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Border Patrol, the National Guard, and multiple local and county law enforcement agencies. At its peak, nearly 100 officers and search personnel were deployed simultaneously. Helicopter units scanned the ridgelines. Drones flew grid patterns over dense forest. K-9 teams worked trails and creek beds. Dive teams searched river sections. Search and rescue personnel fanned out through the mountains on foot. Tips came in from across the region. An early report placed Decker in Idaho, near the Sawtooth National Forest, a remote and sprawling wilderness that seemed plausible given the direction a person might travel heading south and east. Teams were dispatched. The area was cleared. Another search operation in the Blewett Pass area in late July proved similarly inconclusive. A $20,000 reward was announced for any information leading to his capture. New flyers were distributed in mid-June featuring images of what he might look like with an altered appearance, a beard, dyed hair, changed clothing. The assumption was that he was still alive and actively evading detection. But no confirmed sighting ever materialized. Weeks became months. The summer passed. By late July, investigators acknowledged that the pace of new leads had slowed dramatically, and the search was scaled back to a more targeted posture. Resources were redirected. The round-the-clock intensity of the early weeks gave way to a quieter, sustained monitoring of specific areas. In the meantime, Wenatchee and the broader Pacific Northwest processed the grief publicly. On June 20th, a memorial service was held for the three girls. Whitney Decker spoke.
I just have a short something to share. Good evening, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. You all look beautiful, and I know that Evie would have loved to ooh and ah over all of your outfits. She would have been amazed by all the color out there and just thought you guys look fantastic. You know that Paityn would have sought each and every one of you out to try to find something to give you a compliment for. She did that for everyone, whether it was in the grocery store or at school or with me, always telling me, "Oh, you look so beautiful, Mom. I love your earrings," or whatever it was that she could find. I wanted to share a means of connection the girls and I had that I think allowed them to have such warm and open hearts to the community around them.
She described her daughters as having warm and open hearts. She spoke about Paityn's outgoing nature, Evelyn's nurturing spirit, and Olivia's sweetness. Her words were carried by news outlets across the country. The failure to issue an Amber Alert on the night the girls disappeared had, by this point, become one of the most contentious public debates surrounding the case. Critics argued that the alert system exists precisely for situations like this one: 3 children, last seen with a non-custodial parent, unreachable by nightfall. Advocates for missing children called for policy reviews. Whitney Decker and her attorneys pointed to the gap as evidence of a broader systemic failure, one that intersected with inadequate support for veterans struggling with mental illness. It was a season of grief and anger and unanswerable questions. And somewhere in the mountains east of the Cascades, Travis Decker was still out there. September 18th, 2025. Roughly 3.5 months after 3 little girls were found dead beside Icicle Creek, and after one of the most exhaustive manhunts the Pacific Northwest had ever seen, human remains were discovered on Grindstone Mountain, approximately 3/4 of a mile from Rock Island Campground. The site sits at elevation in the same rugged, forested terrain that search teams had been combing for months. The remoteness of the location was consistent with how investigators had come to understand Decker's movements, a man who knew the wilderness, who had camped in that area before, and who had walked away from the campground with the skills to survive long enough to reach terrain that no search line had yet reached. By September 24th, the U.S. Marshals Service formally declared Travis Decker deceased. Investigators were not yet willing to withdraw charges based on the initial discovery alone. DNA confirmation was required. 1 day later, on September 25th, the results came back. The remains were Travis Decker. The case was closed. But closure, in the truest sense of the word, proved elusive for nearly everyone involved. The Chelan County coroner examined the remains and delivered a finding that left the final chapter of the investigation without a definitive last line. Decomposition was too advanced. Environmental exposure over several months in a remote mountain environment, combined with animal activity, had destroyed the physical evidence that would have allowed a cause of death to be established. No autopsy could be performed in any meaningful sense. Investigators could not confirm whether Decker had taken his own life at or near the campsite and his body had moved, or whether he had died somewhere on Grindstone Mountain and simply never been found until that day. They could not rule anything in. They could not rule anything out. What they could confirm was that he had not survived the summer, that he had not fled to Canada, that no second chapter to his story had played out anywhere. On October 15th, 2025, the 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of first-degree kidnapping filed against Travis Decker were formally withdrawn. With the subject deceased, there was no case to prosecute. No trial, no courtroom testimony, no verdict rendered by a jury. For Whitney Decker, the weeks and months that followed the discovery would be defined not by legal proceedings, but by advocacy. She became a vocal presence in conversations around veteran mental health resources, calling for systemic changes in how the military and the broader healthcare system identify and support veterans in crisis. She also lent her voice to ongoing efforts to reform the conditions under which Amber Alerts are issued, arguing that the night her daughters disappeared should never have unfolded the way it did. Her attorney, in the aftermath of the case, stated plainly that the system had failed Travis Decker long before Travis Decker failed his children. It was a complicated thing to say. It was a complicated thing to hear. But it pointed toward the larger, harder conversation that this case demanded, one about what happens to the men and women who come home from war carrying damage that no one properly treats, inside families that absorb that damage until they cannot absorb it anymore. 3 children went to a campground in the mountains with their father on a May evening. Paityn, 9 years old, Evelyn, 8, Olivia, 5, they did not come home. And the question that sits at the center of this case, the one that no forensic report, no court document, and no official statement has ever answered, is the simplest and the most devastating one of all. Why? There was no note, no final message, no explanation given in any form, just an abandoned truck at the edge of a forest, a wallet left behind like an afterthought, and 3 little girls who trusted their father with their lives. That trust was the most innocent thing in this story, and it was the very thing that made it possible for the worst to happen. The case of Travis Decker will be studied, debated, and revisited for years, in criminal justice courses, in social work training programs, in policy conversations about how the country cares for its veterans, in the harder, quieter conversations that happen in homes and custody hearings and court waiting rooms, where the line between instability and danger is rarely as clear as anyone wishes it were. What is clear is this. 3 girls named Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia Decker were here. They were loved. They deserved far more years on this earth than they received. And the people who knew them, who watched them grow and heard them laugh, and saw the specific, irreplaceable way each of them moved through the world, carry that knowledge with them every single day. Thank you for watching. If this case moved you in any way, please leave a comment below, share this video, and subscribe if you haven't already. Every view, every share, keeps these stories in front of the people who need to hear them. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop asking questions.